Welcome to this two session today and or perhaps one session today and one session tomorrow, and then there remains two other sessions that we will manage in future and let you know. The topic of this workshop is getting published, and Dr. Rima from the Academic and Journal Publishing HBKU Press. She's the head of that section and also Associate Professor, College of Science and Engineering, is collaborating with me, and we have produced this workshop for the students, especially PhD students who are required to have at least two papers published as a requirement for their viva and defending their, thesis. I think it's a good idea if we move on to the outline of the workshop. As you can see, we have thought about four parts to be discussed in this workshop. I think today we will be able to cover parts 1 and 2, or I don't know, depends on how we will, our speed and also the discussion that we'll have. So it's our aim to cover all these four, parts. I would think that actually we'll cover part 1 today and part 2 tomorrow. And then for part 3 and part 4, we will let you know. Maybe next year, because we are now very busy with, other tasks. Basically, what we are going to cover in this workshop is in part 1, we will discuss some of the issues related to before submission and some of the issues that we need to consider as journal article authors for the preparation of the manuscript. As we can guess, actually, it's a complicated process, and in order to get published, we need to address many things and prepare the manuscript appropriately so that it could be submitted to a relevant journal. And therefore, what we will be discussing is two types of papers, review papers versus original empirical research articles. We have chosen these two types of journal articles because I understand that our PhD students sit for a qualifying exam, and as the requirement for this qualifying exam, they need to produce two review papers on the topics related to their area of study, and therefore this position you in a good place in order to publish review papers. So I think it's not far-fetched if you think about publishing the essays of your qualifying exam. On the other hand, as soon as you start collecting data for your thesis project, then you will be in a good position to publish one or two empirical research articles from your data as well. Whereas I know some PhD students who have actually published 5-6 papers, depending on the scope of their study and the data sources that they have been able to secure and the analysis that they have carried out. And as I mentioned before, the publication of two papers, including review and empirical papers, or the acceptance from the journals showing that your paper has been accepted and can be, published in a relevant journal is a requirement for the PhD thesis viva or defense of your thesis. And what is important to know is that the structure and the genre of these two types of papers are different, which we'll discuss. And then we'll move on to write different sections of review or original empirical papers. And then we will move on to how to search for references and how to organize them and to use citation software. I will handle the first two subparts in a sense, part 1A and part 1B. And then Dr. Rima will take over for the third part, subpart, which is part 1C. And she will be talking about how to research for references and how to organize them and using citation software programs. Tomorrow, it will be the reverse. I mean, Dr. Rima will cover two parts, and I will be, talking about one part. Tomorrow, I will be talking about choosing the right international journal, and Dr. Rima will be discussing submission checklist, including compliance with author guidelines, as well as preparing a cover letter and peer review suggestions. And we'll leave parts 3 and 4 for now, and we'll get to these parts later on when it comes to time, and you will be informed, the same as, the first workshop. Okay, let's move on and tackle the first part, which is if we think of getting published as 3 stages, and usually this is the case based on the experiences that we and you might have. We do some work before submitting a paper to a journal, and then we wait for the reviewers and the editor to get back to us with the feedback and reviews, and then we need to deal with those reviews. So what are the main things that we need to consider before submission in order to prepare the manuscript? And for me to attend to that, I would like to draw your attention to review versus original empirical research articles, which, as I mentioned, we need to be cognizant of the genre of these different, types of, papers. To contextualize these two types of papers, I would like to expose you to a variety of journal articles, actually. The major ones are original empirical articles, those ones that we collect first-hand data, either from human beings or from labs or from some other sources. And we do some sort of analysis depending on our methodology. It could be quantitative analysis, qualitative analysis, or a mixture of them, and therefore in the form of a mixed methods article. These are considered as empirical articles because we collect first-hand data. But in addition to empirical articles, there are usually review papers. And these review papers might have different names and can take different shapes. 3 very common. Of course, there are other forms of review papers, but we are mentioning 3 common ones here. One is called systematic reviews. The other one is called a state-of-the-art articles. And the third type of review papers is called meta-analysis. We are not going to cover all of them, but you need to know the difference between them. Usually, meta-analysis is used in quantitative research, where researchers carry out a statistical analysis, and then they come up with the effect size, and therefore through a meta-analysis it is possible to synthesize many quantitative studies on a particular topic, and then make some final conclusions. So this is not what we will be discussing in this workshop. it needs perhaps an independent workshop itself. The next one from bottom up, state-of-the-art articles. Usually, state-of-the-art articles are written by more experienced, researchers in the field, and usually they are commissioned in the sense that the editors of the journals approach established researchers, those who have published materials in the form of books or book chapters or journal articles on one topic, and then they will be invited to prepare a state-of-the-art article. As you can guess, a state-of-the-art article covers what is the current status of research on a specific topic, and what are future directions for research in that area. I have published a couple of state-of-the-art articles that you might search in Google and see, and usually the length of these articles is much more than ordinary articles. Ordinary articles can range in terms of word number between 6,000 and 10,000 depending on the journals, but usually a state-of-the-art article is the one that I actually co-authored in 2014. One of them, for example, is around 22,000 words. So it's by itself like a thesis of at least masters. So again, we are not going to discuss a state-of-the-art articles, but I just provided this piece of information so that when you see a state-of-the-art articles or you search for them, you understand what the nature of the state-of-the articles are. But we are concerned about systematic reviews, and systematic reviews for those of PhD students who have already completed their qualifying exam or they are doing it this semester is what more or less they do. Because you choose a topic and then you conduct a systematic search in different databases using different keywords, and then you collect relevant articles. It depending on the scope of the review. They might include 30, 40, 50, relevant sources. And then you start to extract the main arguments from these articles and then synthesize and produce a systematic review that you can share with your audience and your readers. So in this workshop, we will be focusing on original empirical articles, those articles that you possibly extract from your thesis or part of the data that you have collected for your thesis. And also we will be focusing on systematic reviews. There are other forms of journal articles. One is book reviews, where when you read a book and you like it, you write a review about that book. So you can check reviews in the journals as well and see how other researchers have written book reviews. And finally, opinion and commentary articles. Sometimes it might refer to as theoretical articles in that researchers, based on their past research and experience, they try to provide a commentary on a topic, or they can even produce a methodological type of opinion article. Okay, when we talk about publishing journal articles, if we want to think about the order in which we can go through our life experience based on the stage that we are in, then I would suggest starting with book reviews. Writing book reviews is easier than the other types of papers. And therefore, I encourage you to write 1, 2, 3, 4 book reviews. Although we write book reviews all through our, academic life, still, Dr. Rima, myself, other faculty and researchers at HBKU and other universities might write book reviews depending on the books that they read and also, the time that they might have. But it's a very good start for new, researchers like yourselves who want to start, publishing. And the good thing about book reviews is that they are not difficult to write. Usually they have a specific genre or a structure in which we start with, talking about the overall content of the book. And then we talk about the main, positive aspects of the book. And then if you have any criticism or suggestions so that the authors can take on for the future, editions of the book, we write that. So usually it has 2, 3 parts, and it's easy to write. And I encourage you to have a look at, book reviews in some of the journals that you're subscribed with, and see how book reviews are written and organized, and start writing your, book reviews. And the next, after you write 1 or 2 book reviews, then, as I mentioned before, especially for our PhD students who sit for qualifying exam, they are in a very good, chance and position in order to change their essays and their papers that they have produced for their qualifying exam into systematic reviews. Especially because your essays for qualifying exam are read and examined by 2 examiners, and also you participate in an interview session where you present your papers and then you receive feedback from, examiners. So that's a very good, opportunity to incorporate the feedback and the comments that you receive from the examiners and the reviewers, and therefore produce, papers that could be published in relevant journals. And then once you start collecting data for your thesis, it would be a very good practice that as soon as you complete the first data set for your thesis, you start to analyze the data and perhaps produce some papers that could be published in relevant journals. So all the 3 types of papers are achievable, feasible, and I highly encourage everyone to consider them and publishing them. Since so far I have been talking to PhD students, I also would like to invite master's students as well. So they can also write book reviews, they can write systematic reviews, and also they might be able to change their thesis into, journal articles, or extract 1 or 2 articles from, their thesis. I would suggest that you leave state-of-the-art articles and opinion and commentary articles for later stages in your academic life, and therefore you can concentrate on and consider the first 3 types of, journal articles. By the way, if you have any questions, please jot down your questions, and at the end, hopefully there would be time for raising your questions, and we would be happy to answer your question. In this workshop, we will be focusing and concentrating on 2 types of articles, which we think are more relevant to our audience, our CHSS, students: systematic reviews and original empirical, articles. Okay, the next point that I would like to discuss with you is the structure of journal articles. We need to keep in mind that there is no fixed structure that is followed by all journals. As you will review and read articles from different journals, you will see that the structure of articles are different, in different journals. Although, as we will see, there is, a suggestion from John Swales that we can structure, journal articles. But the reality is that each journal may recommend its own, structure. Not only a structure, but also journals are different in terms of number of words allowed for different types of, journal articles, but also they are different in terms of the writing style. This is why it's a good idea, and Dr. Rima will be talking about, or you can, our actually aware center has, materials on different writing styles, APA, MLA, Chicago, and, other writing styles that different journals actually might recommend. APA, which stands for American Psychological Association, and they have produced a writing style manual, which, if I'm not mistaken, the 7th issue is already out. Is usually considered by many journals in our discipline, humanities and social sciences, as well as, many journals, but we need to check what type of writing style the journals actually require, which will have implication for within text citation, as well as for the list of, references at the end of the article. How can we find out about these issues and points? Usually journals have a document called Guide to Contributors or Instructions for Authors, where we can find all of these pieces of information there, and therefore we need to make sure that we produce an article that fits with the conventions of the journal. So once you select a journal to submit your paper, you need to check, the Guide to Contributors and or Instructions for Authors, and make sure that your manuscript is prepared according to their, guidelines. Although I said that different journals have different structures and that there is no fixed structure for journal articles, but John Swales, who is an American, applied linguist, has done a lot of research on different structures and genres of journal papers in different disciplines, from sciences, engineering, humanities and social sciences, health sciences. And he has produced a very useful book, which is called Genre Analysis, and which is published in 1991. And alongside that, he has published, many articles, so we can search for publications by John Swales and become familiar with the genre of, different types of, journal articles. One of the structures that John Swales have come across based on the analysis of many journal articles is that usually journal articles, regardless of the discipline in which they are published, has an IMRAD structure, which IMRAD stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, and discussion. However, I believe that this generic structure could be expanded into Il Pemardec, or whatever we pronounce it, which needs to include introduction, literature review. So in John Swell's structure, literature review is considered as part of introduction. However, in many articles, especially in humanities and social sciences, usually literature review is an independent section, in the papers. And so we need to recognize this. Also, usually there is a section called purpose. Again, although not all the articles have, an independent section called purpose, as we'll see, but we need to know that we need to talk about, the purpose of the article, and then we have methods and results, discussion, and conclusion. So these are the main parts or sections of an empirical, journal article. Okay. Now, the next part that I will, talk about is how to write different sections of a review or an original empirical paper. I will keep a review paper short, but will focus more on empirical paper because I think review papers actually has more or less more streamlined, structure, but empirical data need more elaboration on how we need to, fill in on different, sections. Now, for review papers, generally speaking, and we are all familiar with this, genre structure, that usually we need to have three sections: introduction, body, and conclusion. However, this is very different from a 5-paragraph essay that we used to write when we were, undergraduate students. In that, usually we had an introduction that ended with, a thesis statement, and then usually 3 paragraphs of body that elaborated on the thesis statement, and then finally, a conclusion. When it comes to review papers, it's a bit different. First of all, in the introduction, we need to have the statement of the problem or the topic or the challenge. So what has been the problem that guided us to do a literature review, or what topic we are going to do a systematic review, which again is familiar to our PhD students who have completed or are in the process of completing their qualifying exam. They do exactly the same thing. And then we need to talk about the significance of the problem, topic, and challenge. We are all living in a world that the resources are, limited, and therefore including our time, and therefore we need to be very cautious about where we invest our time. So not only yourself, but also your readers will be asking these questions: why in the world we should be concerned about, this topic? And therefore, in order to persuade ourselves as well as our readers and audience, we need to talk about the significance of the problem. Why this problem? So, for example, if it's climate change, we need to argue that climate change is a critical, crucial issue at the time we are living in. Or if we think that, war is something that, threatening human beings' lives here and there, then we need to articulate the significance of the topic that we have chosen: poverty, food scarcity, or food risk, or educational topics, for example, why using formative assessment, for example, is important. So we need to talk about the significance of the topic that we have chosen and the problem that we are addressing, or the challenge that we as human beings are facing, and especially those who are also interested in this topic. In other words, potential stakeholders. And then in the introduction, once we have introduced the topic, its significance and importance, Then we will talk about the organization of the paper, how this review paper is organized. We might say that the review paper is organized in 3, 4, 5, sections, and a very little one-sentence, explanation about each section. Then in the body, remember that the review articles and review papers are not shopping lists, in the sense that we say A says this, B says this, C says this, X says this, and Y says that. Now, this is not, a literature review. It would be more, a summary of the sources, which people refer to as shopping list. And they call it shopping list because the same list that we prepare for shopping, fruit, meat, bread, and sanitizers and things like that. So we prepare a list, in fact. A literature review, a systematic literature review, is not a list of different items or different things. Rather, it's a synthesis. So one of the criteria that is used in order to read, evaluate, and examine review papers is to what extent the author has been able to read, identify main arguments, and synthesize them into different themes, and therefore present a thematic presentation and a critical review and discussion of the main arguments in the body of their review paper. Now, depending on how many themes you have identified, how many main arguments you have identified in the Ph.D. Articles that you have read, for example, then you will have corresponding sections in the body of your review paper. So the important thing in the body of a review paper is that rather than presenting sources one by one, we present a synthesis of the main arguments and how we attend to them. And then in the conclusion section, we come across a synopsis of the main arguments and discussion. In other words, we communicate with our readers what is known about the topic based on the review that we have carried out, what are some of the issues and problems, and what is missing, which this missing actually can be topic-wise, related to topics. So, for example, as I mentioned before, if we are focusing on an educational, topic, then what aspects of that educational topic has already been researched by other researchers and what is missing, which as soon as we say that, although, these aspects of the topic have been researched, but this part has not been addressed yet, then this is the identification of the gap for future research. Sometimes actually it might be, making recommendations, methodological recommendations. So we might say that based on the review that we have carried out, we noticed that the majority of the studies use a quantitative approach, and therefore we need more qualitative, type of research in order to deepen our understanding of the problem. So since I have already talked about review papers for PhD students and how to organize their, qualifying, exam papers, so I skip this section and we go more to empirical articles and how to write each section of, an empirical article. A very important point to consider is that each section in the empirical paper has a function. And it's very important for us to remember that function. And this function differentiates different sections of the papers from each other. And when we are, aware of each section, therefore we use appropriate structure for each section, and relevant language, terminology. So, for example, the type of terminology or words that we use in the methods section is different from the type of words and terminology that we use in the introduction section, although there might be some overlap. So what I'm going to do in this next part actually is to walk you through each section in the empirical articles and tell you what are the main parts or main points that we need to ensure that we include in that section. Articles, let them be review articles or empirical articles. You usually have an abstract. And this abstract might range between 150 to 300 words. There might be some fluctuations lower than 150 and higher than 300. But generally speaking, most of the abstracts we can say that fall within this range between 150 and 300 words. Again, this is something that is identified by the journals, and they are strict about these numbers. And so one of the things that we need to learn and consider when writing is to look at the guide to contributors and see how many words we are allowed to use in order to produce an abstract. The function of abstract, because I said that each section has a function, the function of the abstract is to give readers a synopsis of the whole paper, a summary of the whole paper, right? So just by reading the abstract, one should understand what the whole paper is about, even if they do not read the rest of the article or the paper. Now, remember that I'm focusing on the main sections. You can imagine that each article actually has a title, which by itself is very important, and writing good titles is another skill that we need to develop gradually. And for those of our PhD students who are writing, their qualifying exam this semester, it's important for them to choose appropriate titles that is eye-catching on the one hand, and on the other hand is self-explanatory. Again, by reading the title, we should understand what the whole paper is about. And thirdly, it is concise. Usually it is recommended that the title of the papers be 10 to 12 words, although again there are fluctuations, and we understand that things will be different for different types of papers. Anyways, so in the abstract, the main function is that it provides a summary of the whole paper. Again, using John Swell's recommendation, each abstract must include 4 or 5 moves. The term move is used by John Swells, and it means transitions from one statement to the other, and so that together they can fulfill the function of the abstract. What are these 4 or 5 moves? As you can see, a statement of the problem or purpose, methods, including sample, participants, data sources, data analysis, results, and implications. It's very obvious that we cannot include too much within 150 to 300 words, which is usually the abstract, and therefore the type of writing and the terminology that we use should be very carefully crafted and concise. So usually 1 or 2 sentences about the statement of the problem, what the problem was, or the purpose of the study, and then in the methods, just who were the participants, how many of them, and what data were collected, using what instruments, and what sort of analysis were conducted. In the results section, we need to just highlight the main, results and refer the readers to the results section of the paper for the full and complete, findings. And in the implications, what do these results actually mean to different, stakeholders, or how they can benefit from? Sometimes we have implications for researchers, sometimes for practitioners, sometimes for curriculum developers, sometimes for policy makers, decision makers. So all of these are considered as, stakeholders, and therefore um, uh, we might not have, recommendation for all the stakeholders, but we can make some beneficial and helpful implications and recommendations for relevant, stakeholders. So, to summarize, when you are writing an abstract, make sure that you have these 4 or 5 moves in your abstract. I mentioned I wish we had time to, bring in some examples of the abstract so that you could see how more experienced, authors and researchers actually have written their abstracts, but this is not difficult to do. You have read many articles, and it's very easy to find, articles, journal articles, and you can just have a look at the abstract and see how they arranged and managed these, 4 moves in the abstract, and learn from them. So by looking at the abstracts of the papers, we can learn how to write our own, abstracts. The next important section of the journal articles is introduction. The function of introduction is to create a research space, or CARS. The abbreviation of create a research space is CARS. Again, I have borrowed this from, John Swales and from his book. And what we need to do in the introduction is to introduce the problem or the issue or the challenge, and why it is important, and to who. Now, an important point here is that we might use a selection of the literature, because I said that literature review is an independent section. However, we can choose some of the significant, sources in order to support our argument for the importance and significance of, the problem or the challenge or the issue. And then in the introduction, we need to talk about what is already known about this problem and issue, and then what is missing from the current literature, and therefore creating a research space where you can initiate, a new project, and how your present study is going to, fill that niche or that gap. Now, in some journal articles, you will see that the purpose of this study and the research questions follow immediately the introduction with no independent, title. But in some others, actually, purposes of the study can have, an independent section, as we'll discuss it. I'm discussing those journal articles that have an independent section for literature review and purpose. And so the function of the literature review is to contextualize your research and to identify the gap or niche to be filled with your proposed study. In other words, since you are not the first person who is going to tackle, this research problem, there have been many other researchers in different parts of the world who have also have also considered, this problem. However, the difference is that they might have approached it from a particular perspective, And therefore, this is what you need to share with your audience and with your readers. Inherent in the world review is critical review of the main knowledge claims. Please be reminded that any research finding is not written in a stone. It's only a knowledge claim. And to the best of the researchers' knowledge and practice, they provide evidence for what they claim as a piece of knowledge. And therefore, you as a reviewer and as a new researcher need to critically review these articles and these knowledge claims, both related to the arguments that researchers put forward, as well as to the methodology that they use. In other words, the soundness of the methodology, and this implies that we need to be familiar with the principles of different methods, and to check to what extent those principles have been observed by researchers, especially because it's very important. Any knowledge claim is based on the outcome of data analysis, and therefore, if the data and the analysis have problems, then the knowledge claim can be, shaky. And therefore, these are the things that we need to, clarify in our review. And therefore, in the literature review, as I mentioned before, you need to synthesize the main arguments and say these are the knowledge claims put forward by previous researchers, and identify the issues regarding those aspects of the research topic that have been studied. It's very important that you also do a synthesis of the methodological issues. So, for example, if you have 30 articles, how many of them approach the topic from a quantitative perspective, how many of them from qualitative, how many of them from a mixed methods approach, and what implications these can have for the knowledge claims that researchers actually might have, made in the article. And finally, based on the review that you do, you identify some of the issues as gaps in the current understanding. So we say that we understand, this phenomenon, this topic, based on this research that is done. However, it seems that we still do not have much information and knowledge about this aspect of the topic, and therefore you open a new, research space for your own research. And this takes us to the purpose of the study. Once we review previous literature, identify some gaps in need of further research, then we are in a very good position to talk about the purpose of our study. The purpose of the study, as I mentioned before, can have an independent section in empirical, journal articles, or they might be presented at the end of the introduction or at the end of the literature review without any independent, title. But the function of this section is to tell your readers what the purpose of your study is. And usually there is one or two paragraphs that explain the purpose of the study that you have carried out and now you report on, along with some specific research questions that are addressed by your data and analysis. And so depending on the scope of the study, you might have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, research questions. But we need to make sure that the research questions that we pose in our papers are answered through our, data and analysis. The next section of empirical articles are methods, and the function of methods is to communicate with your audience how you planned for and implemented your study. The method section should include the following: a justification of the chosen methodology. So this is very important. Different researchers actually choose different, methodologies in order to address the problems that they have chosen to work on. The chosen problem and the purpose of a study might lend itself to a quantitative study, predominantly with quantitative data and analysis, or it might lend itself to qualitative data and analysis, or a combination of them, mixed methods. So you need to explain this to your readers. Don't think that it's taken for granted. You need to articulate why you have chosen a particular, methodology and approach to your research. And once you explain about your overall methodology, you also need to talk about the specific method, because as we know, in any of the three broad approaches to research, there are specific methods. So, for example, in quantitative approach to research, we might have experimental designs, we might have surveys, we might have, a structural equation modeling, other types of, quantitative methods that we need to explain. In qualitative approach to research, again, our study might be a case study, it might be an ethnography, it might be a phenomenological, study. So we need to clarify and explain not only about the general methodology, but also the specific method that we have followed in order to collect and analyze data. Once we justify the chosen methodology, then we talk about sampling procedure and participants. It's very important because each of these three general approaches, quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods, have their own specific sampling procedures, and even the terminologies are different. So, for example, if I'm doing a quantitative study, my readers are expecting terms like probability sampling, or simple random sampling, or a stratified sampling, or cluster sampling. Whereas if I'm doing a qualitative research and I use random sampling, it would be odd. Basically, the sampling procedures that are used in qualitative studies are either purposeful sampling, or a snowball sampling, for example. And in mixed method research also, there are at least 4 approaches to sampling, which are, have their own literature, and therefore we need to consult, relevant literature and cite and justify our choice of, sampling procedure. The sample size also is different in quantitative, qualitative, and also in mixed methods, could be a combination of both. And therefore, we need to justify why we have chosen this number of participants and what are some of the features of these participants. Together, these will make the sampling procedure, and participants. And then we need to talk about data sources. What data sources are we using in our study? There are a variety of techniques of collecting data and forming data sources that again we need to talk about. And then data analysis. Again, depending on quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods, we need to provide adequate information and explanation about the data analysis procedures. One of the frequent criticism of journal articles made by reviewers is that the data analysis procedures are not adequately explained, and therefore, because any inference and conclusion and results that we present in the paper are the outcomes of the analysis, data analysis that we have carried out. Therefore, they need to be, explained, carefully. So, to summarize, the function of methods is to show to our readers how we planned for this study and how we implemented, our plan. In other words, how we worked our plan and how we implemented our plan in reality. And these are the major things that we need to explain in the method section. In the results section, we need to communicate with our readers what we have achieved through data sources and data analysis. And therefore, in order to achieve this function, we need to present our results in an objective way. Now, this is very important because even if we are doing, qualitative research, we need to present the results as we have achieved through data analysis. We should be careful not to do any interpretation of the results in the results section. So this is why that I'm emphasizing that in the results section, we need to present them and findings in an objective way, just what we have achieved through data analysis. Let it be quantitative or qualitative. And you may use tables, graphs to communicate your findings. It's very common in journal articles, again, depending on the nature of the data analysis. We can have tables, graphs, charts, very relevant visual aids that can help us to communicate our findings with our readers, but we need to be careful that whatever visual tools that we use are meaningful and really necessary. In other words, we are not going to repeat things. For example, explaining something in prose and in sentences and then provide a table, so they overlap with each other. But summarizing, major findings in a table, but then explaining it, that would be something that we usually do. And one of the strategies in results section is that our research questions actually might guide us to present our findings. If you remember, I said that we might pose 2, 3, 4, 5, research questions. Then in the results section, we can even restate the research question, what the research question was, and what did we find through data analysis of quantitative or qualitative data and analysis. As I mentioned before, in the results section, we need to be as objective as possible. But our voice, our interpretation comes in the discussion section. And therefore, the function of the discussion section is to help our readers understand what the findings mean. And we usually do two things in the discussion section. Number one, as a person, as a researcher who is very close to the topic, context, and findings, you are expected to interpret the results. What do they mean? What these results, what does a correlation mean in this context? What does a significant t-test between two groups, for example, mean? And what a thematic analysis and the themes and categories that we have come across in a qualitative data analysis mean? So in the discussion section, we try to interpret our results, and no one is in a better position that you as researcher, because you are very close to the topic and the context. So for example, if you are carrying out a research in Qatar, you are familiar with the socio-political context of Qatar, and therefore, or socio-educational context of Qatar, and therefore you are in a good position to interpret, the results, and therefore helping other people and readers to understand what these results mean, whether something is, means very different from, other contexts or not. The other important thing that we usually do in the discussion is we compare our results with previous studies that we reviewed in the literature review. Now, this is a subtle, and interesting point to remember, that there is a link between different sections of the paper. So it's not that different sections of paper are separate from each other. they are like a chain, and therefore they go hand in hand, and they are linked with each other. We do literature review to contextualize our study, and then in the discussion section, we draw on the literature that we reviewed in that section, and therefore compare and contrast our results with the previous studies. And this adds to, the discussion and understanding of the results and communicating our results with other people. All right. It is in the discussion section that we need to be articulate, we need to be interpretive, and we need to be elaborative around, the findings and the results that, we have come across, and therefore changing, information into knowledge. This is what is called that by interpreting and comparing our results with previous studies, we change the information achieved through data analysis into knowledge that could be shared, with other people. Finally, the final section of the empirical articles and also in the review articles is the conclusions. And the function of the conclusion section is to summarize the study and to highlight the main results and their implication for different stakeholders. Now that we have presented all the other sections in the paper, what are the final concluding remarks? This is why that sometimes the word conclusions might not be, or might be replaced actually with concluding remarks. And some points to consider in the conclusion section is that it should help readers to remember what the purpose of the study was. And so it's not odd if we reiterate the purpose of the study in the conclusion section, saying what the purpose of the study was, and then highlight the main research achievements, what was the main results of this study, and provide the implications of the research findings for different stakeholders, as I mentioned before, and provide readers with some potential research opportunities for future. And this is usually common in the thesis as well as in the journal articles. I think I covered, my section, and therefore I would like to pass over to my colleague, Dr. Rima, who will be talking and discussing organizing your sources using, software programs. And as I mentioned before, hopefully after her, talk, then we will have some time for questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yazi. And I would like just to know if I have the control to share my slides. The slides.
I think so. I have given you actually I have defined you as co-host. So,
okay, excellent. So let me try.
Yeah, see if you can use this slide and you have control over changing it.
Okay, sure. I will try.
عايزة يلا انطروني.
So, do everyone see the slides on my screen?
No, we cannot see.
Okay, Dr. Rima, let me stop sharing my screen and then
okay.
Hopefully you can.
عايشة تعي طلعيني من الكول، مش عم بعرف اطلع منه. طلعيني من الكول. الله ينفع منك.
What?
انا بكول مش
You're not. It says start meeting. You're not in a
No,
call.
no, I am in the call.
يلا يلا خلاص.
I think it says viewing Dr. Rima screen. Yeah.
So you can see my screen now. Do you see my screen? Dr. Yazi?
Yeah, yeah, I can see part 1C, is it?
Excellent. Yes, this is what I started with. Okay. Okay. So shall I carry on?
Sure. Yeah, please, thank you.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Dr. Yazi, for the first part. And here we continue on more details on using a citation software and how you organize your references, because they are basically the first step for any successful piece of writing. So in terms of organizing the references, you are all aware that we cannot do the citation manually unless it is 1 or 2 references per document, which is not the case in your stage. So in that aspect, we need to use a specified and organized way to do it, so that we are not worried whether we omit a part, we added a reference, we replace something with something else, that the order and the sources are placed in the right position. To start with, I would like first to suggest that whenever you start writing a manuscript, to be aware that it is never going to be excellent or perfect from the first or 2 or even the 10th draft. So you always tend to save the draft continuously rather than updating the same version. Why? Because normally after some period of time, when you want to, for example, decide on the final version, you might get back to the original work, and then you will be, for example, feeling regretting that you deleted some parts that you need to include later on. So it's normal to create a folder where you have many drafts as you work on daily basis. Let's say you can name them by numbers, you can name them by the date, but never ever try to save the same draft from A to Z to the final one. Talking about, again, using softwares for helping us to organize our references, there are a lot of referencing softwares. For example, you might, oh, sorry, I don't know what happened. You see my screen again?
Weird.
It's okay now?
No,
Oh.
I think, yeah.
It disappeared.
I don't know. Click enter, I will share again. It's okay now?
No.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, yes, yes.
So I will use this one rather than I am using my old computer at home. So now we are talking about the citation or the bibliographic softwares that we would recommend. However, there are a lot of softwares suggested, like Zurito or EndNote online, but we need to understand which one does what. So if you are using the citation management software, this software is able to organize, store, and retrieve your references whenever you want. However, if you are using a citation software online, it's not gonna help you a lot, because it is very easy for one-time and urgent tasks, but it will not remember your references for later on when you add or when the reviewers ask you to update your list or add anything. The beauty of the citation softwares is that they only import PDF. So it assumes that you have the PDF of the references, that you have a file where you organize your references, as we will see shortly, and then you just import them all together and use them whenever you feel appropriate. However, the citation or bibliographic softwares do not fix errors, such as sometimes the references that you are using, even in PDF form, they are very old, like a real old source where you have to cite. However, the way this PDF was created tens of years ago, maybe it's not very well encrypted so that the Google or any source or even Mendeley or any software can read it properly. So sometimes when you add a reference, some piece of information are mixed up or even missing, so you need to fix them manually. Even this issue, we will show you an example. Sometimes also there are details related to the number of pages or the volume or whatever. You need to make sure that they are all placed in order in the software before submitting your work, because whatever your Word document will take from the software, it will not recognize if something is messed up or, like wrong. This would happen basically only with very old references. However, with the current or new references or the well-formatted one, you will not encounter this issue. But all in all, let's say it's worth it that you look at the reference list at the end before you submit your work, just in case. Here is a list of some of the common bibliographic software, such as Mendeley, EndNote, and Zotero. However, I would like to focus in my work here or on our presentation on Mendeley. Why? Because it is free of charge. It is always updated. Whenever you have a citation style, like Dr. Mahdi mentioned, some journals have their own style. They don't like Chicago on its own or APA or Vancouver. They develop their own style. So Mendeley would help you to import that style and use it without any hassle. The first step to use Mendeley is to download Mendeley Desktop from its source. And then you connect it to a Word document via a very easy step that is available on a very short YouTube video, how to show you to do that. So once you download and create an account, you download it. It's called Mendeley Desktop. You can just plug it into the Word document via a very simple short process that is displayed on YouTube. And then it assumes that you have a folder where your PDF references are stored. And I would like to suggest a way of organizing your references. You might not prefer to do it, but it will help you later on. It will help you later on because, again, when you read many references for your work, especially for any literature review work, whether you are writing a thesis or a paper, you will sometimes forget the source of a very interesting piece of information that you would like to refer to. So I have this way of organizing this, suggesting it to our students, starting by the year of publishing, using the final or surname of the first author. And then we write few words that are related to the content. Sometimes we even remind ourselves, oh, this is an excellent source for environmental transport. This is very useful. This is talking about 1, 2, 3. Some keywords that are shown or displayed on the name of the PDF that will remind you later about interesting stuff that you encountered so that you don't have to open 30 or 40 resources to try to remember where you read something. So now we have our folder with our sources organized, and then we need to use it in Mendeley. So we need to import it to Mendeley. Here we have two ways. The first way is direct. When do we use the direct import of references for Mendeley? When we have that folder of PDFs, when you have the reference as a PDF, so you have access to it. You downloaded it, you have it as a PDF, then it's directly imported to Mendeley via the process that I show you. However, when we sometimes don't have access to a certain article, but it is a primary source where you found interesting information in the abstract and you are sure that you want to refer to it, for example. There you have to add it manually. Also, we will show you how to add the reference manually. So in both cases, you are using the reference in a very ethical and legitimate way and very organized way. Let's again refer back to the fact that you have the file in terms of PDF. So it's ready, it's downloaded. What you have to do is that you open the plus sign in Mendeley, and then you have the options of adding the file immediately or adding it manually. In this case, we have it as a PDF, so we can add it immediately or directly. Hence, it will ask you to locate that reference in your computer. So for example, I'm going to add the reference by Karaj, and then you say open. It will immediately be imported on the top of the list of references that you have in your library. Here, this is one of the things that I would like to remind you. You can double click on it to check that the entries are all complete and they make sense. So is this a journal article? Yes. So Mendeley identified this by reading, the encryption of the file, that it is a journal article. It identifies the authors to be here, the journal name, etc. The issue here is missing. So you can add it manually by double click on the reference and it will open for you, and then you can add it manually. If you don't need the issue number in the citation style, then you can leave it. So here I'm showing you, when you double click on the reference in the library, a new screen will open in Mendeley, and then it will show you the details of the article or the reference. And then these fields are open for you to edit. If you click on any one of them, you can edit, delete, add, or modify. However, if we don't have the file or the reference as a PDF, we don't have full access to it, like, some subscribed sources, and we don't have an access. But again, we are sure that we would like to add that as a reference because we saw something interesting and useful, for example, in the abstract. You can add it manually, again, by pressing on the plus sign. Instead of saying adding file directly, it is manually. And then a new window will open for you. In this window, again, Mendeley will primarily suggest that this is a journal article. So if it's a journal article, you can fill in the data manually from the online version. So when you open, for example, Google, and you have that article with the abstract but no access, you can download it. You just, copy paste the info related to that reference, and then it will say save. But journal articles are not the only source that we might need to enter manually. It can be a book or book section or conference proceeding or anything, It has all the lists. And I recall seeing the latest version of Mendeley recently, having added even more sections to the types of the references so that, more people are including different types. Even for web page, it has some sort of, like classification, and each one has different inputs. We can see here for a report, for example, you don't have a journal name because it's not a journal name. It is not an issue, it doesn't have a volume. For a journal, we have the authors, again, the journal name, the volume, the issue, the pages. And for conference proceeding, you don't have the volume or the issue, you have the proceeding title. So Mendeley accommodate for any type of a reference based on the type of the report or the manuscript itself that you can use in order to enter everything manually in case it didn't identify the source properly. This this is an example where we added a reference and a lot of things are missing. It's related to an article that is dated 2014. You might believe that 2014 is not an old reference. You are correct, but the way this reference displays online and when you download it as a PDF, there is some issue in the XML or the tagging thing of the file that Mendeley cannot read it properly. So again, that displays the work of typesetters behind the scene who work for publishers. And I say that because managing the academic publishing at HBKU Press made me aware of a lot of backstage work that typesetters can do. And they impact everything related to the reference that you are using. It is not read sometimes by Google. It's not read by, search engines properly. It's not downloaded properly. It's just because the typesetters didn't, upload it to the system or to the publisher website with certain tagging in terms of coding. It's not our fault, but it happens that this is the case when you download a reference and Mendeley cannot read it properly in order to fill the data. So in this case, you can just, when you click on it, it will open this, and this is a very active field. You can just write here 2014 manually. The volume is 37, and then the pages are there. Now comes the style for the citation. The beauty of using any bibliographic software or citation software is that it deals with the citation style itself. So Dr. Riaz mentioned very important point. Whenever you want to apply for a journal, it's always recommended that you read the guidelines for authors, because if they don't use a very common citation style like Chicago, Vancouver, APA, then it means that the journal has its own citation style. And instead of worrying about it, because even us, we can do it manually without mistakes, Mendeley or the citation softwares are aware about incorporating that in the system. So you can just choose the citation style within that, link, or clicking here. And then if you don't find it, you can click more styles and search for it. And if you still don't find it in the library of Mendeley, there is a way of importing it from the publisher website. It's very handy, it's very easy, and you can use it always. Once it's there in the library, you can use it for next time submissions. You don't have to do this every time. Now let's see how we actually create our draft. So when you start writing a manuscript, it's again, we said we have to create many drafts so that we can refer to the original source day after day. However, the first step is that you might find something interesting from a certain source, and then you copy pasted that part before paraphrasing, and then immediately you have to use the citation software immediately, even before you do the paraphrasing part. Why? Because later on at the paraphrasing stage, you will definitely forget the source from where you got this information. So it is always preferred to have the citation software open from day one. Whenever you have a certain piece of information extracted from a certain source, always make sure to use the citation immediately. So here we use the citation this way. You have a piece of a draft or information written by yourself, and then all what you have to do is to click on Insert Citation. And at that point, when you are standing, for example, at the site or the location where you have the reference to be added, it will highlight it as yellow for a few seconds before adding it. And at that stage, the window will open this way. It will ask you if you would like to go to Mendeley to check for the reference and cite it immediately from the list. So if this is the case, you can click on it, and then you click on these semicolons, double commas. However, quotation marks. However, if you remember the author name, you just write here few words of the author name or the title, and it will immediately suggest the paper for you. If it's the case, You say, okay, if it's not, you say again, I want to go to Mendeley and choose it from the list. In both ways, you will have at the end the reference added and highlighted, or like it shows you that it is gray. That means that it is incorporated successfully within the text in your draft. So now we have added a few references within the text, and then we are ready to add the bibliography list. Here, all what you have to do is to click on Insert Bibliography. You can always click on Insert Bibliography at the end, whether you finish the referencing inside the text or not. So whatever you have there, it will be, like displayed according to the style of the citation, in the proper order, in the proper style, without worrying about the content. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's always preferred whether you are using the perfect software or not, because they are sometimes causing errors, not because of the software, it's because of the encryption of the PDF file, for example, or the coding behind the scene. So it's always worth it that after a hard work that you have done, to double check the reference list. You need to check it for any missing references, for any missing info within the references, for double references sometimes by mistake, or for a reference style errors that you might, like encounter, like sometimes Latin, like letters are not displayed properly, or the superscript like CO2 is not displayed properly, etc. So it is worth to have a very, quick look on the list to make sure everything looks really well. So up to this part, I think Dr. Riazi, it's you to cover the submission, or it's mine.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Rima, for covering organization of the references and using Mendeley. I think we are done for today, and we will follow up on this discussion tomorrow. So I would like to go back to our, first slide and show what we covered and what we will be covering. So would you please go to the second slide outline of the, okay, thank you very much. So basically what we did today was that we discussed how to prepare a journal article to submit to a journal. And we talked about different types of, journal articles, but focused on two specific ones. One was systematic review papers, and the other one was empirical articles. And then we talked about the structure of the two types of, papers, review papers and empirical original articles. And then we discussed how to write different sections of the review paper or original empirical, papers. The important point that we reminded ourselves was that each section in a paper has a particular function, and we need to be aware of the function that needs to be fulfilled by that particular section, and it has implication for organizing and structuring that section in the paper, as well as using the appropriate words and terminology, and even sentence structures. And then in the third part, Dr. Rima walked us through software programs, and in particular Mendeley, so that we can organize our references and even draft our papers within Mendeley. And I think it's also a personal experience that Mendeley can very efficiently used for literature review, because once we have got our references organized in Mendeley, then it is possible to do the literature review there, and also prepare manuscript for submission to the journals. We will follow up on today's discussion tomorrow at 4 p.m. Again, we will be talking about submission to the journals and choosing, journals, and also talking about how to write cover letters and, handling comments is later. At this stage, I would like to give floor to our audience and see if they have, any questions. And I take this opportunity and remind you again that our AWARE Center has very useful, resources that you can use in order to, prepare your manuscripts, and also they have workshops and consultations for how to handle, writing of the papers and different sections. And Owen kindly shared with me also a document they have recently prepared, and it's available on our website regarding, publication procedures that are very informative and useful information in that document that you can check. And also I will talk to Owen and see if it is possible to make this recorded workshop available for those who were not able to, attend today or might not be able to attend tomorrow. Okay, any questions now, please? Okay. Yeah, you can, let me see. We can also, you can use the microphone to raise your question, unmute yourself and raise your question, or you can type your question in the chat section. Now, I can see that I have a question regarding handling Arabic citations. Last time I used Mendeley, I was unable to insert these sources using Mendeley. Is it so? So, Dr. Rima, this is a question for you.
I can't see the questions, but again, can you please read it for me? Last time, the question was that they used Mendeley, but you are muted, Dr. Riyaz.
Yeah, sorry. The question is about handling Arabic citations in Mendeley. Is it possible?
Oh, this is a very good question. Actually, I'm not aware that it uses Arabic citation. Maybe in Note is better. This is a very good question. I will investigate if the recent version encounters for that one, because they released in September, last month, they released a new version that it seems to be very updated in many features. So we can check on that. But actually, no, I didn't try it before for Arabic, and I think some complained about the issues related to it.
Great. Thank you very much. And the next question is from Khaled. Would the material be made available, the slides? I mean, as I mentioned, I will discuss this with Owen, who is in charge of AWARE, and we will see how we can make the materials available for future use as well. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? I can unmute your microphone and raise your questions, or type your in the chat box. Seems that there are no questions. When there are no questions, there are two interpretations. The first one is that the materials have been self-explanatory, that did not, cause any questions. And the second one is that the materials have been so complex that did not, allow for some questions. But I can see the feedback in the chat box that hopefully it has been clear, and I hope that You can start your journey of publishing in journals, and we are all familiar with this expression that the journey of 1,000 words starts with a single step. As I mentioned, the first perhaps achievable, feasible approach of getting published is to think about and work on a book review. If you have not already published, papers, and therefore you want just to start. So starting with a book review will be something that opens the whole window of academic publication in front of us. And we can shoot two birds with one stone. Not only we can read a book and make sense of different chapters and sections, but also we can inform other people about how the book is written and what is there and what might be missing for future editions of the book. Thank you very much for attending this workshop, and we will have the next part tomorrow at 4 p.m. again online. And so please feel free to attend and encourage your friends to attend as well, and come up with any questions that you might have regarding publishing journal papers. And then, as I mentioned before, we will have two other parts that will be in 2023 on mostly on post submission and dealing with the comments and reviews that we get from the reviewers. All right. Thank you, Dr. Rima, for accompanying me, and wish everyone all the best and have a great evening. All right.
Thank you.